مرحبا بكم مشاهدينا في حوارات السياق. أعلن سفير الإمارات في واشنطن يوسف العتيبة أن تعاونا وثيقا بين الإمارات والولايات المتحدة ساعد في التصدي لهجمات حوثية جديدة على الإمارات. وقال العتيبة إن الخطوة التالية يجب أن تكون وقف تدفق المال والسلاح للحوثيين من الجهة الداعمة لهم، مضيفا أن الولايات المتحدة يجب أن تتحرك لوضع الحوثيين مجددا على قائمة الإرهاب. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا ديفيد الباحث في معهد دول الخليج العربية في واشنطن وكبير الباحثين في الشؤون الدولية في المجلس الوطني للعلاقات العربية الأمريكية. أستاذ ديفيد، مرحبا بك معنا.
Hello.
الإمارات والسعودية في أمان بشكل ملحوظ على الرغم من التهديدات الحوثي، كيف تفهم ذلك؟
A good question. So, in an absolute sense, they are, of course, safe. The damage done by these limited incursions is, limited, and they're large countries. They have large cities. They have extremely robust missile defense capabilities. Nobody has really robust drone defense capabilities, but in an absolute sense, of course, they're secure. 99.99% of people can move around and conduct their daily business. What the Houthis and their Iranian sponsors are seeking to do is to destabilize, to create a climate of psychological fear, to scare off investment and to force concessions to what the Houthis and the Iranians want. But in an absolute sense, yeah, they're secure.
القيادة المركزية الأمريكية كانت اعترضت تهديدين صاروخيين باستخدام منظومة الباتريوت. كيف يمكن أن تساعد الولايات المتحدة حلفائها في مواجهة هذه التهديدات؟
A good question. So there's a lot of misunderstanding of how missile defense actually works. It's not a broad-based, like shield that protects an entire country. It protects specific points. And so the United States, the UAE, and the United States and other countries where it has Patriots deployed integrates into the air defense network there. And they share the same information on incoming missiles so that they can intercept it from whichever missile battery, American or Emirati, is best suited to shoot down that incoming missile. At the end of the day, though, just defensive measures, won't win a war. So really, given the fact that Iran has armed the Houthis with the capability to project power, to fire missiles into Abu Dhabi, into Riyadh, the only thing that's going to stop that is a peace. And most of the focus of the Biden administration has been on enabling the Tim Lender King mission to try to, basically end the war in Yemen. Other than that, people are going to be vulnerable to a bad actor who decides to fire missiles at cities. There's no such thing as 100% security from that threat.
السفير الإماراتي في واشنطن العتيبة قال إن التعاون الإماراتي الأمريكي ساهم في صد هجمات الحوثيين وأن الخطوة التالية هي وقف التدفقات المالية والأسلحة للحوثيين. هل باعتقادك ستساعد الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية على تحقيق ذلك؟
Well, the United States has. There's a UN Security Council resolution that calls for the cessation of shipment to the Houthis, and the United States has seized numerous shipments of weapons. I think most recently, just in the last month, usually at sea. So it's usually the naval effort. So that's ongoing. It appears as though we know that in the case of the missile that was fired at Riyadh Airport in 2017, that missile, Qiyam missile, came from Iran. It was cut in half, put into a shipping container, and then welded together in Yemen to be fired. So there's a lot of ingenuity here. And with drones, for example, those can be shipped as components and then assembled there. So it's very, very hard, to do this, to stop this, given that there's such a requirement for humanitarian aid to go into the country, and to inspect every shipment would worsen the famine in Yemen, which is a very, very serious and deadly problem. But the United States has been in the forefront of that from the start and will continue. We're actively taking part in the defense of key military infrastructure in Abu Dhabi. So, that's there is an involvement in the defensive effort, but again, it's limited. Um, and, I mean, at the end of the day, look, there are no Patriot missiles defending Washington, D.C. We rely on our good relations with our neighbors. And, the United States and Canada fought wars. There are soldiers from my regiment that are buried just over the border in Niagara Falls, Canada, from fighting the Canadians there, bloody battles in places where my relatives live today. That's really what's gonna solve this. There are no weapons along the border between the United States and Canada because we've learned to get along. And, inshallah, that's what we'll see in the region, but it's going to take a long time. And Donald Trump doesn't want to get involved militarily in Yemen. And Barack Obama, I think, regretted his role in the start of that, didn't want to get involved militarily in Yemen. And Joe Biden doesn't want to either. Those are three very different people, but the policy is the same.
إلى أي مدى يمكن أن تصل المساعدات الأمريكية لحلفائها؟ هل مثلا سيتم إعادة النظر في التدابير والتقنيات في القواعد العسكرية في البلدان التي تتعرض إلى تهديدات؟
Well, there's been a huge ongoing effort to help our security partners. There's been a 50-year effort, longer than 50-year effort in the case of Saudi Arabia, to help them build competent armed forces. And what you're seeing is the payoff of that training effort, that only the United States has done. So, the Saudi air defense forces have intercepted over 300 missiles. That is incredibly oppressive for any armed force. The Emirati forces are the first to fire the THAAD air defense system in combat. That's the most advanced missile interception system in the world. That came from the United States. But the actual war itself in Yemen, the Biden administration doesn't see that as productive. I think most observers think that it's not terribly productive, that it actually works. The ongoing war strengthens Iran and works to the detriment of the security interests of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and their partners. So the focus there is not to, the United States isn't going to go in and fight that war for anybody. I think we're trying to end it. And I think the reason why we're trying to do it is basically because of the famine going on and the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. So there are limits to what the United States can be expected to provide.
أفهم من كلامك أن حرب اليمن ليست الآن من أولويات سياسة بايدن الخارجية بالنظر إلى كل التطورات على الساحة الدولية من أفغانستان إلى أوكرانيا.
What I'm telling you is that it's a priority for the Biden administration, but the Biden administration is not prepared to end the war by sending in American aircraft, weapons, tanks, or by providing them to the coalition forces in Yemen to do that. So we're prepared to facilitate a diplomatic solution, but I think that the Biden administration has decided that the coalition military efforts are not going to be the way to end the war, and that we're not going to support that for a number of reasons.
هل ستعيد أمريكا تصنيف الحوثيين كجماعة إرهابية؟
Good question. So the American government does consider Houthis to be a terrorist group. They're listed in the State Department reports on terrorism as a terrorist group. The issue is whether or not the U.S. government will take the additional policy step of applying economic sanctions to the Houthis. And the problem with that is every humanitarian organization involved in famine relief in Yemen, and the Yemeni famine is probably the greatest ongoing humanitarian crisis of our age. Every humanitarian organization has said that applying the additional policy step of economic sanctions on the Yemeni government will make it impossible to provide famine relief in those areas the Houthis control. If you sanction the Houthis, basically the only people in the areas under the rule of the Houthis who decide who gets to eat and who doesn't is the Houthi government. It paradoxically strengthens their control over the areas they control. So it's viewed as counterproductive. So I think individual Houthi leaders will continue to have sanctions on them, and I think those sanctions will expand. And the United States will continue to consider the Houthi movement to be a terrorist movement in the State Department reports on terrorism. But I don't think the additional policy step of applying economic sanctions will go on. And I think the reason is because of the humanitarian crisis.
هناك من سيجادلك حول هذه النقطة تحديدا، لأنه سيخبرك أن هذه الهجمات تختلف عن الهجمات السابقة من حيث عدد الضحايا بين المدنيين.
What happened was the Trump administration for 4 years and 51 weeks or for 3 years and 51 weeks, was well aware of this issue, and they knew that nobody in America, nobody in the Biden administration loves the Houthis. We know who the Houthis are. When Blinken announced the lifting of sanctions, he pointed out that they've killed civilian targets, that they've targeted infrastructure, that they've diverted aid, that they've skimmed off aid, that they've committed war crimes. But the Trump administration, for 3 years and 51 weeks, said, we accept all of that, but that will make the humanitarian system, the international humanitarian organizations, it'll make it impossible for them to work on famine relief. When Trump was leaving office, I think he basically said, well, I'm going to do this as a problem for the next administration. I honestly think that, if he had been reelected, I don't think he would have designated the Houthis for the same reasons that the designation was lifted. And it creates this narrative, which, your question kind of hints at, that, well, they've always, people think, well, they've always been listed as terrorists, and then Biden took them off the list. So, why not put them back on? But that's not the case. They were on the economic sanction list for less than a month. Look, nobody loves the Houthis, okay? Basically, what we've decided, what the United States government has decided, is that the hostage takers, the Houthis, have so much power over the hostage that if we sanction the hostage takers, the hostage will suffer more. That's the decision.
اعذرني، لكن هناك أيضا هنا من سيجادلك حول هذه النقطة. سيخبرك أن بايدن انتهج سياسة القطيعة مع أغلب سياسات ترامب، وجاء عند نقطة الحوثيين واستمر على نفس النهج.
I've got to tell you, I teach at the National Defense University. One of the things we talk about is, what is the strategy? What are the elements of the strategy? I have not seen anything that looks like an American strategy for Yemen from Barack Obama or from Donald Trump or from Joe Biden. What we have is a general system of principles. The difference we had was, Obama seemed to feel like, okay, coalition, you want to go and take limited military action to restore the rightful government of President Hadi. Fine, we'll support you, but at a distance and with active measures. Trump was kind of like, we don't want to get sucked into this, but we'll continue to support you, particularly with weapons. Even if there's problems in Congress, we will push weapon sales through. When Biden ran for office, by that time, his party started to view Saudi Arabia and the UAE as too close to Donald Trump, and viewed attacking Saudi Arabia and attacking UAE as a way to attack Donald Trump. So unfortunately, you saw even more shift in this idea that they were going to stop the sale of offensive weapons, which is, to me, a meaningless term. That was all about the domestic base. And, when Biden came into government, he started behaving a little bit differently. When he was running for president, he said Saudi Arabia needs to be a pariah state. When he was president, he's actually sending military aircraft, combat troops to Saudi Arabia, which, had not been in Saudi Arabia from 2003 to 2019. They were sent by Trump after the Abqaiq attack, but he's continued that deployment. So again, there's more continuity than change, and personalities don't matter as much in the American system as they do in some other countries.
هل ترى أي علاقة بين الهجمات الأخيرة للحوثيين ومحادثات فيينا؟ هل هناك أي نوع من الضغط هنا؟
People have been making that case and saying, well, the reason why there's not why the United States doesn't conduct airstrikes on missile launching sites in Yemen is because we're sacrificing Gulf interests for the Vienna talks. That we want to get a deal with the Iranians, and so we'll let the Houthis and all the Iranian proxies do whatever they want. But the thing to bear in mind is, you've had hundreds of Houthi attacks into Riyadh. You had the attack on Abqaiq. Those all happened in the Trump administration when there were no Vienna talks, and the American reaction is more or less the same. I think that there is an emerging bipartisan consensus in the United States that the Yemeni war was carried out by the coalition. We kind of, the Obama administration kind of said, well, if you want to do that, fine, but you're on your own. And it's gone bad. And we're not going to get dragged in to a war to solve it. Neither Trump nor Biden wants to have another Middle Eastern war. And the policy is remarkably the same under Trump and under Biden. that we don't want to be an active part of the fight against the Houthis. So, the attack on Abu Dhabi, it's another country, but there was an attack on Abu Dhabi in 2018, and the Trump administration didn't respond to that. And if our friends in the UAE and elsewhere in the Gulf think that this is just a Joe Biden issue, they're really making a mistake. This is kind of a consensus in the United States. This was a war that was started by the coalition, and it's going to have to be ended by the coalition. And the United States, I think, regardless of who's president, doesn't want to get sucked into it. They want to see it end.
لأنك كررتها أكثر من مرة، هذا يدفعني إلى التساؤل: هل تعتقد أن إدارة بايدن تشعر أنها متهمة بالتخاذل في هذا الملف؟
Yeah, I think a lot of people in the region see it that way, because in the region, you have strong leaders who tell the government what to do, and the government does it. And so people tended to view that, Trump was like, an Arab leader because he'd send his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a special envoy out to do things. And but really, when you look at how the United States government works, it's because it's an advanced country, there's a lot more continuity. The individual leaders and the political leaders don't make as much difference as they do in countries, the difference between Obama and Biden and Trump is much less than the difference between Abdullah, between the different kings of Saudi Arabia.
ما مدى تورط إيران في الهجمات الحوثية على دول الجوار؟
The weapons that the Houthis use for long-distance strike clearly come from Iran. The missiles come from Iran. Iran, we know that Iran is arming all of their proxies, Lebanese Hezbollah, various Iraqi militias, and the Houthis. So they would not have a missile capability without that. And they would not have a drone capability without Iran. The drones are getting so easy to assemble that in 5 years, the Houthis will probably have domestic drone capability. And the Iranians are trying to teach all of their various proxies how to make their own missiles so they don't have to ship them. Now, the bigger question is, were these attacks directed by Iran? And we don't know, but I would point out that, the Houthis managed to seize Sana'a without significant Iranian aid. They get weapons, they get missiles, they get support, but they're their own indigenous movement. And when I look at the hierarchy of direction, when I look at, who are really puppets of Iran versus who Iran is working with to exploit, the degree of control that Iran exerts over the Houthis is much less than it exerts over Lebanese Hezbollah or some of the various, like Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq. They have a much greater degree over those groups than they do over the Houthis. So that's a question that I'm sure people are looking at, but I don't have the answer as to whether or not Iran directed this specific attack.
شكرا جزيلا لك ديفيد ديروش، الباحث في معهد دول الخليج العربية في واشنطن وكبير الباحثين في الشؤون الدولية في المجلس الوطني للعلاقات العربية الأمريكية، للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق. مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة، إلى الملتقى.